Welcome to the June 9th, 2022 Parma City School District Board of Education work session. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please, Mr. Nucio.
Mrs. Bratz.
Present.
Mrs. Carpus.
Present.
Mr. Kreis.
Present.
Mr. Ruda.
Present.
Mr. Vaughn.
Present. Unless there is an objection, we will dispense with the reading of the special meeting notice. Dr. Smiley, can you please confirm that the public portion of this meeting is currently being live streamed?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Could you please monitor the live streaming throughout the public portion of this meeting? And if there is a problem, please speak up immediately so that the technical difficulty can be addressed.
Yes, we will.
Thank you. Just a reminder, community members are welcome to attend the Board of Education work sessions. However, there is not an opportunity to participate. That leads us to Mr. Maniloff. The floor is yours, sir. Would you like to begin?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
For inviting me here, I appreciate it. As I understand it, I am here to discuss, I have a few handouts per usual. I understand that I'm here to discuss tax levy matters, different kinds of levies, and pros and cons of different kinds of levies, levy planning, and then to the extent that you want to also talk about it, we can talk about bond issue related matters as well, and the potential November bond issue, and a lot of work has gone into laying the foundation for that over the last several months, and so I'm happy to talk about that as well, and any other thing that you might want to talk about that has to do with things and money. I don't really deal with the people's side of things, the labor and employment sides of things, but anything dealing with facilities, buildings, money, fair game. And so I thought what I would do just for discussion starters is to hand out what Sean gave to you, just a one-pager that is kind of a refresher. There's a one-pager in green, and then there's a separate yellow one that has election deadlines for next year. Election deadlines for this November are at the bottom of the green page. So I think we might be referring to both. So let's start with the green page and just kind of go over the current millage being levied by the Board of Education. You have operating millage in effect, 46.5 voted mills for current expenses. Because of House Bill 920, that rate has been reduced to 19.02 effective mills this year on Res Ag property. There's two classes of property, Res Ag property and industrial commercial class 2 property. I'm just dealing with Res Ag for the moment. And then you also have various emergency levies that are in place, totaling at this point 19.90 mills for collection this year. The millage rate bounces around from year to year as assessed valuation goes up and down. So the voters on an emergency levy do not approve a not to exceed millage amount, rather they approve a dollar amount, and then the idea is that from year to year as assessed valuation goes up and down, the county helps you adjust the dial so that you try to hit that dollar target. Is what you're doing with the 4 different emergency levies that you have on the books. What are the 4? You got 9,197,860. That's that equates to this year 4.50 mills, and that is in place for 10 years, and it was renewed in 2019, and it's good through collection year 2030. So you're good on that one. You're good on the next one as well, 15,624,693, 7.6 mills this year, 10-year emergency levy, good through collection year 2031. Don't have to worry about that for a while. Now the next one, 7,603,000 even, equating to 3.8 mills this year. That's a 10-year levy, The last collection year there is 2024. So that's the first one of the emergency levies that, that is of concern here for the Board of Education. And then the last one to complete the picture, $8,062,500. 4 mills is the equivalent millage. 10-year levy, again, all 4 of your emergency levies are 10-year emergency levies. Last collection, 2027. So, and then you have inside mills of 5.1. All of that is going to operating. And other possible uses of inside millage could be for debt service, could be for permanent improvement purposes. If you moved inside millage, you could, what that means is you change the purpose of the inside millage. Right now, all of it is going to operating. So your total operating millage, when you add the voted millage together with the inside millage, and the inside millage is what you've been granted by the state government back in the early 1930s. They said what you get, and that's that is unvoted, essentially millage. The rest is approved by the voters. Total millage for operating 71.5 mills. Again, because of House Bill 920 reduction factors, you're down to 44-ish mills, 44 mills for operating purposes. You also have a 3-mill permanent improvement levy. 3 mills is what was voted on, but PI levies, just like your current expense levies, get dialed down to House Bill 920, so you're down to 2.17 effective mills. Because of the appreciation of property, and thus House Bill 920 kicking in, knocking down the effective millage for residential agricultural property, down to 2.17. Total, 74.5 mills, voted and unvoted, 46.19 mills is what you guys levied last year. The Board of Education levies the taxes. The county permits them to be collected, but you guys levy the tax. And so you levied it last year for collection this year, and you're collecting 46.19 mills. As mentioned, well, then let's, I guess, let me pause there at each step along the way here to ask if there's any questions about what you guys already have in place. And, you know, so, yeah, again, any questions, fair game. Yes.
I know we explain it almost every time, but can you just explain for folks watching?
Yes.
How the difference between home values are only impacting, the difference only impacts the inside millage, not the voted on millage?
Right, right. And because you are above the 20 mil floor, you're well above the 20 mil floor. That's a separate concept, but it relates to your question. Because you are above you have a total operating millage of 44 effective mills, well above the 20 mil floor. Then if there is an increase in home values, that simply relates to reappraisal growth. Your house just increased in value. We're not talking about adding an addition, you know, that doubled the value of your house. We're talking about values increasing because of appreciation, and those appreciations are kind of put on the books generally every 3 years. So there's a sexennial reappraisal that goes on throughout Cuyahoga County, and then 3 years after that is a triennial adjustment. And at those 2 times, the county tries to take into account increases in property values, in home values, due to reappraisal growth. And when that happens, as a result of this bill that I was referring to earlier, House Bill 920, that was put in place in 1976. It was spearheaded by then Representative George Voinovich, actually. What happens is that just because your property value, your home value, may double, for instance, in a hypothetical example, it doesn't mean you're paying twice that amount of taxes to the Parma City School District. And so House Bill 920 is a taxpayer measure to say, look, if your home value doubles, you're going to pay the exact same amount that you were paying in terms of dollars. You're not going to pay twice what you were paying. You're going to pay the exact same amount. Well, how do you get there from here? Because you guys are levying mills. and against the tax list and duplicate, against somebody's property. You're levying mills. So how do you get there from here? Well, what happens is you levy the mills, you levy the voted mills. And you probably went through the tax budget process earlier this year, and the county spat out a resolution that Sean gave to you probably in March or April, saying we are hereby levying the following rates for collection next year. And that process is done every year. So you're levying the voted rates. But what is being taxed against people's homes is not those rates, because the state then takes those rates, and through House Bill 920, it reduces the millage through these reduction factors so that you wind up with the effective rates. So that in my example of home values doubling, the reduction factor would cut it in half. And so if you were levying 4 mills, all of a sudden now it's effective at 2, not 4. And so behind the scenes, you get to the effective millage rates so that homeowners pay the same amount of money.
So,
that's
Rick,
that's for current expense levy, not an emergency levy.
Can I interrupt you on that? So we did get $2.1 million additional funds because of the reappraisal, and that's because of the inside millage. Could you
Yeah.
explain that to them?
And this is right. And so this is, sorry for the
No,
winding my way to the answer to the question.
I much
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's so that
Yeah, no
everybody
problem.
can understand.
Right. Yes. So then, with respect to with respect to voted millage, if you, the taxpayers, vote for this, this is the state's guarantee here that your millage, your dollars to Parma CSD aren't going to double if your home value goes up, if you vote for that millage. But there's inside millage. You guys have 5.1 mills. And that was given to you by the state, like I said, back in the 1930s, when we went from 15 mills to 10 mills. We took a 3-year average. I won't get into all the historical details. Suffice it to say, in the early 30s, you guys were given 5.1 mills. Nobody voted on that. And so as to that, if there are increases in property values, that's fair game.
Right.
And so you will wind up with, every school district in the state will wind up with more money as it relates to the inside millage if there are increases in property values at the triennial readjustment or the sexennial reappraisal. In full answer to your question. So that kind of gives you a big picture, I guess. We talked about emergency levies. Taxpayers aren't going to pay more on emergency levies because if values go up, because you're trying to hit a certain dollar target.
Right.
And so if values go up and you're trying to hit a certain dollar target, the millage is actually going to go down because you're trying to hit that same dollar target. And so and those are the 4 that you have in place, the emergency levies. But you also have current expense levies. That's the 46.5 mills. That gets subject to House Bill 920 reduction factors to get you the effective millage. And then there's the inside millage. That completes the picture. And you get more money and you get less money if values go down. And that happened a good 14 years ago, right?
So a follow-up to that question.
Yes.
I think the average increase in Parma was about 16%. So homeowners believe that, well, my property values went up 16%, that means PCSD gets 16% more in tax revenue.
Only as it relates to that one specific teeny
Yeah,
part of
I wanted
the
to
whole
explain that it's
puzzle, yeah.
only the
Yeah.
inside millage is all we get.
It's that piece of the larger puzzle, yes.
So-
So it's the 5.1 mills compared to the overall millage of 44.02 effective. Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
So we have total operating
Right.
74.5 mills. We're not going to talk about effective real quick. We're going to talk about 74.5 mills. So if we had little bouncy balls all laid out, we had 74.5 bouncy balls. Only 3 of those bouncy balls could ever grow bigger. The only other ones could ever grow smaller, correct? The millage, because they represent a mill.
No, five
Yeah,
bouncy
it's the
balls.
5.1, yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
5 bouncy balls. I
That's-
was looking at the permanent improvement, sorry.
Yeah,
Only 5
right,
bouncy
right,
balls
right.
could ever grow bigger.
Yeah.
All the rest, the millage could only shrink.
Unless, asterisk footnote, and I never had to worry about this footnote for most of my career until the Great Recession. that happened in 2008, 2009, because property values actually went down. And what happens is this House Bill 920 thing, let's say property values in my hypothetical example, which is more recent, property values are going up significantly. So I talked about, what if they doubled? Well, what if they got cut in half? The question on the table is, does the state government, House Bill 920, does House Bill 920 operate in reverse? Does it jack up the effective rates, again, to try to hit that same dollar figure? Answer, it does.
Okay.
And so that's the asterisk. I hope that we don't have to worry about that historical blip anymore, and I hope we're back to where we used to be, where with continually rising assessed valuations, home values, and in that environment, the balls, as you say, the bouncy balls are only going to get smaller. They did get a little bit bigger during the Great Recession, because House Bill 920 works in reverse.
But their cash value never changed.
But the cash value did not change.
Got it.
That
So
is-
only
that is
5
correct.
bouncy balls out of the 74.5 could ever change in cash value.
So there's, and the other piece of this is that, that there's a cap. That's another concept here, that when the voters approve a millage levy, again, not the emergency levies that you have in place, but the voters have approved in Parma CSD a while ago, current expense levies that have a certain millage tied to them, and in the aggregate, we're talking about 46.5 mils. That's the aggregate amount that the voters have approved for current expenses over the years. Now, when they vote for like a 4 mil current expense levy, they're saying, we're permitting you to tax me up to 4 mils, but never any higher. And so a lot of school districts that went out with a 4 mil current expense levy back during the Great Recession were very surprised, because the voters approved a 4 mil current expense levy. Assessed valuations plummeted during the Great Recession, and so because the millage is capped, I said House Bill 920 works in reverse. It does, but you hit what the voters approved at some point, and so all those districts that went out with 4 or whatever mil levies back when the Great Recession hit, all of a sudden got a case of the shorts. It was like, we thought we were getting $4 million, now we're only getting $3.5 million. Ugh, why did that happen? Because you could never levy above 4, and because assessed valuations went down. Basic math, 4 mils times a reduced AV is reduced money. That's what happened. So does that make sense? Yeah, okay.
Hey,
Thank you for explaining.
Yeah.
Oh, so go ahead.
Good.
Oh, just a quick one. The
Yes.
inside millage, you said that was, the state gave that to us in the 1930s, 90 years ago?
In the
There's no way to
1930s.
petition the state to change the inside millage?
That would take a constitutional amendment. Yes.
So that's what, it's in the
Yeah,
Constitution?
it is. That
So we're
is
stuck
what
at
it
5
is,
mil.
yeah.
Period.
Right, and just a little brief history, 30 seconds worth of history, because it's interesting, and I think it's an important concept here in this great state of Ohio. Constitutionally and by law, wherever you live in the state of Ohio, you can't be taxed more than 10 mils without your vote. Now, back before the Great Depression of the 1930s, before that, the Constitution said that wherever you live in this great state of Ohio, you can't be taxed more than 15 mils without your vote. And so back in say in the 1920s, various overlapping subdivisions, taxing authorities. So you guys aren't the only taxing authority that can levy a tax. There's the county government, there's the city government, there can be other overlapping governmental entities, and the concept is that you add them all up, and you can never go above 15 back then, and then as a result of the Great Depression, they reduced that down to 10. And that's where we are now. And so if you add up all what the county government...
Yeah, I was gonna say, so like the county, the library, the metro parks, all those together will equal 10.
Or less.
And so that's why we can never go up higher.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Excellent question, Mark. Thank you.
That's right. You can't go higher, right? Yes?
Regarding this, this is part of my question as well. The inside millage, how was that determined? What was the basis for us having the amount that we have?
Yeah.
All those many years ago.
Right. So what they did is they looked at, like I said, overlapping subdivisions were back in the day able to levy millage within what was then the 15 mil limitation, and so and they varied a lot back then. Sometimes Parma Parma schools would levy, 5.1, then maybe 5.3, then maybe 4.9, and so and other political subdivisions did the same thing. And so I actually have this spreadsheet that the state gave me. It's kind of fascinating. I came across it on Saturday as I'm cleaning out my office for this office move. It's kind of fun to look at, kind of back in the day, who was levying what when. And so they took what Parma CSD was levying in 19, I think 31, 32, and 33 in that area, 3-year average. And so in my hypothetical example there, the 5.3, the 5.1, the 4.9, that would average out to 5.1 or whatever. And then what they would do is they would multiply that by 2/3. Because we had to go from 15 down to 10. So it's a 3-year average of what you were levying at the time times 2/3 equals what you got now. That's the history of where we are, and so this history does go back a good 100 years, and so does that answer the question? I guess it's fascinating, and I just happened to come across it on Saturday.
Well, I was thrown. I never
Yeah.
knew that was set in the 1930s.
Yeah,
And
that's correct.
so
Yeah.
that shocked me that there's been no adjustment since the 1930s over all this time.
Isn't that crazy? But
It's kind of-
that said, just we're doing a little deep dive here. What if I said 10 or less mils, right? Well, out in Beechwood, it's less than 10 mils. So all of the overlappers wind up levying less than 10 mils. And so what did Michelle Mills, Sean's equivalent, the treasurer out in Beechwood Schools, she said, so it looks like we're only at 9 or less. So we're not at 10. So there's quote unquote free range millage out there. I'm going to go for it, and talked to their board of education out in Beechwood, and said we're going to go for that mill, and they worked with the county, and they showed a need for the 1 mill on their tax budget that is submitted every January, and lo and behold,
We're at 10.
Exactly. I just asked him, was like, no, we're at 10.
We have no free range, Marty.
they grabbed that 1 extra mill that was hanging out there. Now there's politics associated with that, and as you know, I'm a former board member, and so I'm keenly aware of and sensitive to the politics of things like that. And as you might expect, you're levying an additional mill, and you haven't asked the voters for it. You're just doing it. You're saying, give me that mill. Okay. It hadn't been levied before, and now it's being levied, and so they're levying 1.0 mils or whatever it was. I think it was around there on an unvoted basis. So there are politics associated with things like that. So that's, anyway. And there are more districts than just Beechwood, but that's a prime example. It's in Cuyahoga County, and it happened maybe 10 years ago or something like that. Yeah.
I just had one real quick question.
Yeah, sure.
So 1 mil, so people understand, is basically $1 in tax for every $100 of assessed value of your home, correct? Of what the county assesses your home at. Like my old home was assessed at $39,000. Even though the house was worth $175,000, the county assessed it as a value of $39,000 for tax purposes. I paid $3,900 a year in taxes. So it was 1 per 100 of assessed. It's
Assessed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you want to focus on the assessed piece of that, because the idea is that if you have a $100,000 home, just to make the math easy, then what they are going to do is they are going to assess it for tax purposes. So the market rate, what you could get in the open market, that's what the county does every 3 years roughly, particularly during the sexennial reappraisal. They focus hard on what you could get for that house. And let's say it's $100,000 market value. They're not going to tax you at $100,000. They're going to tax you at 35% of that. So they're going to pretend that your house is worth $35,000, not $100,000. And then they are going to apply the rates the effective rates that we've been talking about here, which in your case is 46.19 mils for all purposes, 46.19 mils times your $35,000 assessed house equals a certain dollar amount, and that's what you wind up paying on your tax bill. And a mill, kind of an archaic term, but it's basically 1/1000th. And so the fun history here is that mill, kind of in French it's like mille, that's 1,000. But the idea was how do we get 5,280 feet in a mile? How does that work? Well, the idea was back in the Roman times it was about 1,000 paces, 1,000 paces, and each pace, like my pace is about 5 feet, and so that's how you get the 5,280 feet in a mile. So that's just kind of one way that I remember mill equals 1,000, and so 1 mil in tax language is 1/1000th. So I don't know if that helps you remember it.
I just know it's very confusing to people what a mill actually is.
Yeah, right.
Really figure out a
Right.
class for that.
1/1000. 1,000 paces, 5,280 feet. Okay, so these are all great deep dive questions to establish the foundation, I guess, for, and are there any others?
I have one.
Yes.
And
Uh-oh.
I know we're going to eventually ask you for a clear recommendation, and I don't want to take too much time, but
Sure.
the legislature held up the Fair School Funding Act as this dramatic revolution in school finance. And quite frankly, this is the same stuff we've been looking at for our duration of times that we've been sitting in these seats or having these roles. Can you talk a little bit about how that really didn't fundamentally change a whole lot?
Well, yes, good point. Going back to kind of the early part of my career, I remember this case called the Durolf case came out, and it talked about how this state's system of funding education is unconstitutional. There was an unconstitutional over-reliance on property taxes, and so since then there have been various pushes at various times. Since then, and it's been going on 25 years, that the legislature has made significant attempts to try to change the formula and to bring about maybe a better balance between state funds and local funds. And there are different political points of view on how far we have come since Durolf to rectify the unconstitutional over-reliance on property taxes. I guess the proof is in the numbers, which we will look at later. The board has approved recently a 5-year forecast. Pam has the 5-year forecast ready to go on the big screen, and we can show what the expected revenues are from state funds, from state education aid, and we can show what a big hole there is to fill over time, over a 5-year stretch, and then Sean has it projected over a 10-year stretch, and that's on the spreadsheet that we will soon see. There are large holes to fill, and how are we going to fill them? We're simply not going to be able. We can't fill them with state funds. It is what it is, and yet we are talking about massive red numbers out into the future. How do we deal with that? Well, there's only one answer that you guys have effectively, and that is increases in property taxes. Of course, you can go down the road. I said only one answer. There's income tax as well, and some school districts, although not really in Cuyahoga County, but some school districts, particularly more in rural counties, have gone with an income tax or some combination thereof. So I misspoke when I said there's only one option that you have. You can try an income tax, but anyway, we'll do a deep dive into that to the extent that you would like to.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else before we move on to basic options. Okay, good. So we've set the table. Now, the basic types of levies to consider for operating purposes, let's start there. I mentioned that you guys right now have two different kinds of operating levies essentially in place. You have millage-based current expense levies, and you have emergency levies. Those are dollar-based, not millage-based. Again, you're trying to hit a certain dollar target. Let's talk about current expense levies first, millage-based. And so you can do an additional levy. That's a classic, when I was in Rocky River, every 5 years or so, we would put a current expense levy on for a continuing period of time. That's a classic School District Board of Education levy, and then it gets put into your general fund, and those kinds of levies can go on for either up to 5 years or for a continuing period of time. Now, I was asked to discuss briefly replacement levies. So, fact of the matter is that you guys have in place current expense, village-based levies that were voted on a long time ago, and over time, because of House Bill 920, they've been the effective rates have been whittled down to what you see on the paper. Now, by replacing a current expense levy that you already have in place, you're saying, all right, House Bill 920 has taken us from 4 down to 2 effective mills. Let's bring it back up to where it was. Let's bring it back up to 4. Our costs have increased over time, but yet, due to House Bill 920, revenue has not kept pace. So let's bump it back up. That's the concept of a replacement levy, is we pick one or more of your levies and say, let's bring the effective millage of that particular levy back up to where it used to be. Not where it is now because of House Bill 920 reduction factors, but where it used to be when the voters first voted on it. Now, that's an option that you have. In my experience, again, 27 years of doing this for about 100 school districts, I haven't done more than a handful of replacement levies. I mean, the concept is sound. It makes sense. It's like, well, okay, I get this House Bill 920 thing, but our costs are going up. And so why don't we just take it to where it used to be, instead of where it is now, to take account of those increases. And the argument makes sense. But the fact of the matter is the politics, in my experience, have intervened, and there's a lot of concern. And there's been concern legislatively. In fact, I was down in Columbus arguing against a law that would eliminate replacement levies because there's a concern that there might be a confusion between a renewal and a replacement levy, and that as a result of that confusion, of renewal meaning your taxes aren't going to increase, we're just asking you to kind of extend the duration of the tax, as opposed to a replacement, which is actually going to increase your taxes. Because of that potential confusion, boards of education don't touch it. Because they don't want the potential backlash from trying to pull one over on the voters. That's the politics of the situation. Again, the argument is sound, but the politics intervene, again, in my experience. And so there's been legislation to try to undo it because of that, to eliminate it. So that's the concept of a replacement levy. So is it an option? Yes. Is it often pursued by boards of education? No. Can you do it? Yeah. I mean, it's fair game legally, as your legal advisor. Incremental levy. That isn't used much either, but I bring it up because some school districts, even in Cuyahoga County, I'm thinking back. Early in my career, I did one of these incremental levies for Strongsville. I did one fairly recently for Solon, where the idea is that the voters are approving a specific tax rate in year 1, and then that tax rate can grow in year 2, 3, 4, 5 at specific increments. So you could start off with 3.9 and then tack on 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5, such that you go from 3.9 to 5.9 over a 5-year period of time. And so that's a legal option. Again, a few school districts in Cuyahoga County have done that. So that, let's see. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions about current expense levy. Again, millage-based levies, those are the basic options. You know, are there variations on the theme? Yes, but those are the basics. Any questions?
We don't
about those?
have any of these incrementals.
That's correct. You do not have any incrementals on your books. That is correct.
How does 920 affect an incremental
Same as,
if it resets in the middle of while it's, you know, in your 5-year period, and then the house values reset, does the millage, it all reset the same way?
They will, the reduction factors, House Bill 920 will look at the millage being levied in any given year. And if you're in the kind of the middle of that, you know, incremental period of time, I guess, where you're adding the increments over time, they'll just look at the levy that you're levying in that particular year, and they will apply the reduction factors in that particular year to achieve the outcome. And they do that from year to year to year.
But the increments would stay the same afterwards?
Yeah, the increments, yeah, so the increments, they have to be the same increments, so I mentioned like 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. You couldn't go 0.5, 0.75, 1, you know, they have to be the same increments in years 2, 3,
No, but what I'm
5.
saying is they
But
won't reset the increments where it was, you voted on 0.5 and then 920 resets it, and then, you know, in the 4th year, instead of being 0.5, it's 0.3.
Yeah, that's a sophisticated question, yes. And so, again, what you'd be levying is the voted millage. So in my example, you'd be levying 3.9 plus 0.5. That's what you levy. And then when the things get reset, I guess, in say year 3, you're levying another 0.5. But what the state is doing behind the scenes is they're saying, all right, you guys are levying in that example 4.9 mils, not 3.9, but you've tacked on another 0.5 and a 0.5. And then they say, all right, you're levying 4.9, and so that 0.5 is a new tax, not subject to the House Bill 920 reductions. But the other ones have already kind of taken into account the House Bill 920 reduction, so they already have the reduction factors kind of built in. Oh man, how to explain this better? Boy, is that a
I understand.
yeah,
So does
it's a
the-
really
okay,
good
so does
question.
the
It's
second-
such a sophisticated
So does
question. I
the-
have to like
Does
really.
the second?
Sorry.
You know.
No, it's a great question. So does the second 0.5 ever have the potential to be on a higher tax value of a house, higher tax assessed value than another incremental jump during that levy cycle? Like if, say in 2020,
Yeah.
we had an incremental. We don't. This is all hypothetical,
Yeah, right,
everyone.
right.
We had
Just
we
to
had it,
Think
right.
through the options. Yep.
And in 2021, it went up 0.5. And then in 2022, before it was ready to go up again, another 0.5 in our increment,
Yeah.
house values were redone.
Ah.
Does that next 0.5 reflect the new house values or the house values the day the original millage was voted, even though it's incremental?
Yeah, the new 0.5 would be applied to the new assessed valuation.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, all right. Yeah, so,
You
sorry, I
said-
was fumbling over my words
No,
there,
that's okay. I was-
But yeah, that example helped me clarify in my
My
mind.
brain started going, as soon
Yeah.
as Mark
Just-
asked, my
to-
brain
to-
started going, and I was like, wait, wait.
Yeah.
Just real quick, you said
Yeah.
some school districts have done that. Have any of them done
Yeah.
it recently?
Let's see, I can answer that.
Or is this something that used to,
I think Solon's was in the last couple of years.
it was recent?
It was in the last couple of years.
It's, you don't have to go through all that. It's fine.
Solon was done May of 2018, millage incremental levy. So they just went from 1.6 to, here's their ballot. Here it is. Oh, actually, you guys were on the ballot at the same time with your 14,724,327.
You mean another one that failed?
That was, so you guys were on there, and Solon was as well, and they started with a rate of, let's see, the aggregate, which may increase. So they started at 1.6, and they added a single increment of 6.9. So they just went
Oh,
1.6,
God.
6 points,
Oh, wow.
done, boom,
So-
boom, done.
So
you can-
when they
you-
voted when they vote on these incrementals,
Yeah,
they say we use your example of
Yep.
the 3.9, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. That,
Right.
they vote on that's going to happen no matter what, right?
right.
Okay.
Did they show the voters the second number?
They-
My gosh,
What
that's a
was the,
gigantic change.
Yeah, yeah.
That is a gigantic.
Yeah, right.
What's
then
the
it makes
thought
it-
process
Yeah,
for doing
totally.
that?
I think the thought process, yeah, the basis for that, I'll think back to Strongsville. My memory's faded a little bit, but my recollection is that they were having a rough time passing a current expense levy. They needed money in their general fund, and they were having a rough time passing it. And so they said, let's sharpen our pencils here. Instead of asking for, let's say, 5 mils, I don't remember what it was, and kind of overshooting so that we can only ask once and not have to ask again, 5 years later. Overshoot now, let the levy cycle kind of catch up, and then overshoot again, and then let the levy cycle catch up, which is kind of that's kind of what we're stuck with in the state of Ohio. Let's sharpen our pencil and only ask the voters for what we need this year. And then, because costs are going up and revenues aren't keeping pace, let's have them, ask them in advance if we can tack on, a little bit more next year, looking at our 5-year forecast, trying to make revenues align with expenditures. Let's ask them in advance to tack on a little bit more and then a little bit more, as opposed to the other approach, which I mentioned was to not take that from year to year, but overshoot. And then eventually expenditures wind up exceeding revenues, and then we have to do this all over again. It's the sine wave levy cycle that all boards of education in Ohio have to deal with.
Which is the usual,
Which is
right?
the usual,
I-
right.
Well,
yeah.
what about,
Yeah.
I'm real interested in this 1.6 going to 6.9.
Yeah, well,
And
going
how
to
they,
8.5,
okay.
Yeah, right.
how that was conceived and sold more than that, I guess.
I think that might be
That's
more of a
very-
question for Solon's Board of or Political Action Committee
And I
that
don't
was
want to
behind
tie
the
up too
scenes.
much time,
no, but
on these.
I
But-
do
but,
have a
yeah.
question that maybe you can
Yeah.
answer while you're explaining
Yeah, sure,
both of ours.
absolutely.
Are there rules in the incremental, I mean, I know there's rules. What are the rules in terms of how many times can you increase it? How often can you increase it? How long can that levy be for? Is that something that you could start with like 2 mils and increase it 0.5 mil every single year for the next 10 years?
The next, up to 5, so
Up to 5.
there's like 4, so you start with a base.
Right.
And in that case, it was 1.6, you tack on 6.9, you wind up with 8.5, and they went out for a continuing period of time. So once that second increment kicked in, it was 8.5 forever and ever, unless it's, reduced by a vote of the taxpayers, et cetera, et cetera.
So that was a continuing levy?
Yes.
Oh, wow, okay.
I'll double check that. I did those proceedings, I ought to know
Wow.
this. Let's see.
That's right.
Maximum rate from an original, okay. Current expenses, maximum rate.
I think it might be a great
Yeah.
way. but
The
I think-
aggregate rate will be in effect for a continuing period of time.
I think it might be a great way to
So-
just address the current economic situation and still connect with voters in a way that, we're sensitive to the idea that times are really tight right now, but if we had to go this route, this is an option, given the
I
fact
like the
that,
option.
I do too, but.
Hey,
confusing
hey,
at
Rick,
first,
I
but
hate
we'll get
to,
it.
I know we only have 15 minutes left.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I do want you to get to the substitute levies and the renewals levies, because those
Okay.
are very
Yes.
relevant
Go,
to
go,
us.
go.
Okay.
You know, incremental is very interesting, we can talk about it
All
all
right.
night.
That's
I
all right.
need you
I'll
to please
pedal
talk
to the metal.
about.
Didn't know there was only
relevant stuff.
15 minutes left. Didn't
Pedal to the
realize
metal, Sean,
I didn't
keeping
either.
me on task. I appreciate that. Okay, that's all good. So the emergency levies, you got 4 of them. Let's talk about those for a second, and substitute levies. So you have 4 emergency levies. You can do what you've always done here and renew them. A lot of school districts, when they're up for renewal, and we talked about when they're last collected, when are they up for renewal? Well, let's just take your the $7.6 million one. That last collection year, as you see on your page, is 2024. When can you ask the voters to renew that tax. No increase in the amount there, and assuming assessed valuation changes, no increase in taxes either. It's just a renewal. So you can first ask them in May of 2023. That's why I handed out that yellow piece of paper, because it has the May 2023 election date and the deadlines associated with it, should you choose at the first opportunity to renew that particular emergency levy. And those are the deadlines. That's the date that you're looking for. And then you can go back again in November of 2023. That's the second time. And then you could go on in the last collection year as well, in 2024. So you could start looking at that in 2023 in May. And so there's a tweak to that, this part of the discussion, I guess a footnote, if you will, to this part of the discussion. You don't have to just renew one. You can renew more than one at the same time, as long as one of those emergency levies is up for renewal. And there's a footnote to that in a second, but I'll get to it. So what's the idea here? Garfield Heights, I love to use examples because I think they highlight the points. So Garfield Heights had 3, I think, emergency levies in place, and they felt like they were going to the voters, every year. There were 5-year levies, I think, and it was just like, all right, can we reduce voter fatigue and just kind of stretch these out, from maybe 5 years to 10 years? They took 2 out of their 3 levies and they combined them for purposes of a vote. And did just a combination renewal of emergency levies. Mount Vernon had 4, and they wound up combining 2 and then 2, so then they wound up with 2 emergency levies. And then they combined the combined levies into 1. So they went from 4 to 2 down to 1. And so, again, with the idea to reduce, voter fatigue, and so that's a possibility for you. Now, of course, the more you combine emergency levies, the higher the millage gets on the ballot. Even though it's a renewal, not an increase in taxes, still, if you were to combine, say, the 3.8 mil one together with pick any other one or more. You could combine all 4 if you wanted to, legally. But if you combine that one with the $15 million one, the 7.6 and the 15.6, now on the ballot, if this were going on this year, it would be 11.4 mils. And so when I talked to the Garfield Heights leadership about combining all 3, they were like, ew, if we combine all 3, the millage is going to be like in the 20s. We don't want to go there politically, so they said, let's just go with 2. But again, legal
Even though
option for you
there's-
guys.
It's the same millage that they are
That's correct.
collecting. It just
Psychological.
looks ugly.
It
Psychological.
looks it's eye-popping on the ballot, and also, and I face this in Cleveland because I represent Cleveland schools. They have a 20 mil, levy on, and so it's all in. When that levy is on the ballot, and so the more you combine, the more you're putting at risk a larger amount of money. If something happens in the district and there's a lot of voter frustration and they don't pass levies, and you need not just 7 million anymore, you need 23 million. Now you're all in on 23, you're not all in on 7.6. So that, again, we're talking about pros and cons and considerations and those kinds of things. Yeah.
When
Yes.
when you consolidate the renewal levies.
Yes.
Are they then voted, I just want to clarify this.
Yeah.
Are they then the millage on the tax valuation from the day they were originally voted on years and years and years ago? Or because it's a new type of thing, it's not necessarily just a renewal, it's like a consolidation of renewals. Are they now then on the current tax valuation?
Yeah, they're treated essentially for those purposes as separate renewals for state law purposes. They're just combined in one vote, but.
So it's not going to cost the homeowner any more money?
Nope.
That's just,
No,
I
they're
wanted to
just
clarify that.
treated, it's one vote, but they're treated as separate. And that matters sometimes because there can be like one emergency levy that has homestead and rollback subsidies associated with it if it was approved prior to September 2013.
I didn't get into that with them.
Oh, you did?
No, that'd be another whole.
Okay, that's a whole okay. Thank you, Sean, again, keeping me on task. I appreciate it.
Can you have a combined replacement and new money issue where they're on the same vote yes bubble? So say the first 8 mills or however many would never cost you any more money than you're
Yes.
already paying now. But in addition to that, there is a 2 mills new operating money attached to this, but it's one vote. Is that
Yes.
possible?
Yes, it is. You can do it with your emergency levies. You can renew and increase an emergency levy. So take the 7.6 mil one that's first up next year if you want it to be. You could renew and increase that. And so if you wanted to increase it by roughly 3.8 mils again, you would say, you know, a $7.6 million of renewal of an emergency levy with an increase of 7.6 mils. And then on the ballot, it would read for a total of 7.6 mils, not 3.8 anymore. So yes, legally, you can renew and increase an emergency levy. And you mentioned replace and increase. You could also do that, again, and once we go down the road of replacement levies, it gets dicier politically, but you could take one of those current expense levies, not an emergency levy, replace it and increase it. So that would be like a double increase, because when you replace a current expense levy, you're already increasing
Right.
the voters' taxes, and then you could increase it on top of that. It's a double
Well, we
whammy.
don't want to do that. We don't want to double whammy
But,
anybody,
yes,
but I was
but an
just curious
emergency
what
levy,
the,
yeah, just the terminology would be a renewal and an increase.
is there any way to get rid of the emergency levy terminology? Because that
Yes.
confuses people on the ballot.
The
Yes.
substitute levy, let's talk
Yes.
about that.
Okay, yep, so yes, and I'll get to that in 30 seconds. So you can get rid of the emergency levy. We did that in Mentor. They went into fiscal emergency. Dan Wilson, the treasurer, was like, we don't want to, we're out of fiscal emergency. We want to get rid of that. And so what we did there, and what Brooklyn Schools down the road, Brooklyn Schools has a bunch of things on the ballot that look and feel a lot like emergency levies, but they're avoid an operating deficit levies. It's the same statute, it's the same concept, it's the same everything, it's just different language. Can you switch midstream? That's what Dan Wilson did, yeah. Out in Mentor, switched from emergency levy to avoid an operating deficit. And again, there's plenty of examples right down the road in Brooklyn.
I think that's
they
much-
got 3 or 4 of those.
I think that's much clearer. Even my husband came home after the last one, and he was like, hello, what is this? And I was like, it's the original language. It's just,
Yeah.
it's there. I didn't know we could change it at that time.
You
I didn't
can.
know up until 2 minutes ago. So
Yep.
I appreciate that because
Yep.
it confused me, and I
Yeah.
listen, I read everything Sean sends me, and it still
As do I.
confuses me sometimes. So thank you very much.
Sure. And now the substitute
Yes.
levy, all this is building to the substitute levy. So substitute levies can be pursued legally by boards of education that have emergency levies in place, and you guys do. So we can talk about this. So what you would do with a substitute levy, which actually we drafted for a particular client, became law back around 12 years ago-ish, and nobody really did it, but for years, for about a decade, and now these things are popping like popcorn. School districts around the state and around Northeast Ohio are starting to do these from Avon, Avon Lake, Barberton, Sheffield Lake, Firelands, on and on and on. The basic concept is to say we're going to substitute one or more emergency levies with this new kind of levy for the quote-unquote necessary requirements, to go to your language issue. It's for the necessary requirements of the school district. And in year one, let's say you did a substitute levy for the one that we've been talking about, the $7.6 million emergency levy. and you wanted to do
David, can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
I was considering the C and D, putting those together.
C and D.
As a substitute levy.
Okay, as a substitute, all right. So Sean is suggesting there that we take the $7.6 million one and we tack on the $8 million one. That you can see right underneath it on the green piece of paper. So now, and you can do that. You can combine more than one. And in the examples that I mentioned, I think in all cases it was at least 2 that they were combining. Sometimes up to 5 that they were combining. So in Sean's example, you're combining those 2, and you're saying to the voters, please approve this. And here's what would happen. In year 1, you would wind up trying to collect $15.6 million, which is the 7.6 plus the 8 in year 1. So same old, same old. But let's say now that there is new construction, not increases in valuation due to simply reappraisal, but there's new construction going on.
Of homes, you mean?
Yeah,
Or
I'm
businesses?
sorry.
Homes
Could
or
be
businesses?
businesses,
Okay.
whatever. There's new construction going on. So property is being added to the tax listed duplicate. It's not merely being reappraised at higher values. It's getting added. Well, if you have an emergency levy, you don't get any more money if property is added. And what winds up is people's taxes go down, the rate goes down, so that you wind up achieving the same $15.6 million. But if property is added in a substitute levy context, you apply the same rate that everybody was paying on, but you take that rate and you apply it to the new property as well. So you get more money. So that helps the school district keep pace with the rising costs, because now you're applying the rate that everybody's already paying, which is basically the emergency levy rate, and you're applying that to the new construction. So the school district winds up with more money. So that's one benefit of this substitute levy, is it's termed as a growth levy, because it grows, the revenue grows as more property is added to the tax list and duplicate. Looks like
Rick,
you
can
have
I
a question.
jump in?
I do, but go ahead, Charlie, you
Oh,
go
I'm sorry.
first.
We may
Yes.
be asking the same question.
Yes.
Is that an addition on someone's home, or is that actual new construction?
New construction. Well, an addition on a home would be new construction.
So
Yes.
if your home is reappraised and goes up dramatically because you actually added, an in-law suite, now that substitute actually is going to collect on that in-law suite.
On that, yes, because it would not be quote-unquote carryover property, it would be new, added to the duplicate.
But
Yes.
it doesn't
So-
affect
Yeah.
people, just the average person, it doesn't affect them.
They would pay the same. Now, importantly, it's fair to point out, they're not going to pay less,
Yeah, right,
but they're not going to pay more.
correct, that's, yes.
Yeah, right. That's an
So-
important political point.
So Rick, on
Oh,
our
sorry.
emergency levies right now, you can do 5 years and 10 years.
You
So
can
on a
do- you can do 10.
substitute levy, explain to
Yeah.
them what the options are.
Yes, good segue. So that's the other advantage, the other basic advantage of the substitute levy is you can go up to 10 years or for a continuing period of time. So emergency levies can't go more than 10 years, as you know. And you have all 4 years going out the max, 10 years. But a substitute levy, you could have the voters approve that it go out for a continuing period of time. So A, you get growth. B, you don't have to worry about that for purposes of your 5-year forecast for the rest of your lives. Yes?
So on the past emergency levies.
Yes.
Anything that was built since the inception of that, are they on there? I guess I'm confused
what?
with that. So like if we passed an emergency levy, 2009, we passed one. It was renewed for then 10 years. I think it was actually before that. But are the new houses that were built, so not increase in appraised value, but
Yep.
new homes that were built, were they added on to that? Or no, because it was an emergency levy and it was the dollar amount? So like, have we not captured tax from, or does it change at the renewal?
Well, in your example, new homes get added, or a shopping mall goes up, or something like that. All of that stuff increases the bottom line at the top, actually, your aggregate assessed valuation. And then what the county does is it takes the aggregate assessed valuation, which would include, in your example, a new home, and they say, all right, that's the assessed valuation. They need to collect, because the voters approved, $7.6 million is what the district has coming to it. So we take the aggregate assessed valuation and we multiply it by something in order to get $7.6 million. And that something is the millage, and that bounces around. So the aggregate takes into account
Okay.
a new shopping center or a new home or an addition on your an in-law suite. It takes that all into account in the aggregate. And then in order to get there from here, they just do the math. This divided by that equals mills, and that's what is levied. From year to year, bounces around.
I'm really in the weeds, but I think a
Yeah.
very realistic scenario. How does an abatement then impact? I mean, so we could essentially put on this substitute, but then we could almost waive the right for new collection through an abatement, I'd imagine.
Yeah,
Do
if
school
property-
districts walk themselves into that?
If property taxes are abated, so it would just be the property that is added to the tax list in duplicate, and that property taxes are abated because, God, you know what? I'm gonna get back to you on that.
That's fine.
Yeah, because there's a difference. And I don't want to misspeak.
There's
a
see
difference
us.
between abatement.
We
and
get all
exempt,
excited. Think about Rockside, right? And so we get all excited. Oh, we can collect taxes on new construction, and then wait, there's all this political pressure to approve this abatement because we want development in the community. And
I think what Dr. Smilek was talking about is
Yeah.
a TIF.
Yeah, and so.
yeah.
Yeah, and I will need to get back to you on that, and I apologize for being stumped, but in my mind, again, I don't want to misspeak because.
It's going to be the highlight of my evening.
Because there's
I was gonna say, that's unusual, right?
There could be a difference between like property being exempted from the tax list in duplicate, like the Cleveland Clinic, gets its property taxes exempted. So there's property, but it's not added to the list. It's added to the big bundle, versus it's added to the bundle, but your property taxes are abated. You don't have to pay. It's slight difference, between not getting added to the list at all and having it added to the list, but by the way, you don't have to pay. And that's what I need to
Clarify.
sort out. So thanks for that question. All right, how much time do I have? -2 minutes?
Yeah, it's 5:01.
negative.
Well, if we can have you, I know you brought the 5-year forecast. I mean, essentially, our questions are this, or at least I think our questions are this. How long can we wait before we put an operating on? I mean, if we're going to go forward with the bond issue in November, obviously, the longer the separation between the bond issue and an operating, the better politically and pragmatically. And second, what would you recommend in terms of a millage? I think those are really probably our core questions.
Yeah,
So the
and-
board member, you gotta have to crank your neck and look over your shoulder.
And so what I did in preparation for that question is I took I took Sean's 5-year forecast. This is what Sean sent to me in an Excel format, and all the stuff in color that you see is stuff that I've added. So if there are any issues related to any of that, that's on me. And so Sean provided everything else. So what Pam has highlighted there, see the 3.9, there we go, the 3.9 mils. If you were to put a 3.9 mil levy on the ballot next year, then you're looking at the blue shaded cells, yes. Because then what would happen is you get a half-year collection in fiscal 2024, because column I believe, is fiscal 2024, and on and on. And so
K is 26.
K is 20, yes, so I is 24, J is 25, K is 26. So you can see in 25 and 26, you get the full year's collections on 3.9 mils, which is $9.7 million. You get half of that in that first year. So if you were to put on a 3.9 mil levy, you're going to wind up with, bottom line there, cell K73, and Pam has it highlighted there, 172,664, you're in the black. Because right now, you're in the red, 24 million. That's two above Pam's cursor, yeah. Right now, Sean has you at 24 million in the hole. If you put 3.9 on next year, you can estimate, certain million assumptions, disclaimer, 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 you're going to wind up with 172 in the red. Now, Pam, why don't you change 3.9 to 4.9, and let's see what happens. Focus on the 172. Pam, just change 3.9 to 4.9.
You have to hit enable editing,
Oh, enable editing, okay, there you go.
and then you can change that.
Yeah, and then just make it 4.9, and just watch what happens to the 172. Now hit enter. Okay, now you went from 3.9 to 4.9. Now instead of 172,000, you got 6.4 million in the black. And so that's just by way of example. Now the other thing to look at is let's focus on the, I don't know what you call it, salmon, pinkish, whatever. So if you were to wait until 2024 to put a 4.9 mil in this example, current expense levy on the ballot, or its equivalent, an emergency levy or whatever that equates to 4.9 mils. If you were to wait a year, you would not have $6.4 million in the bank. That's if you did it in 2023. Wait a year, and you're still 5.8 in the hole. That's the difference that kind of in real terms here that arises from waiting an extra year. And so if we want to get that number in the black, Pam, let's take it up to 5.9 and see what happens looking at the salmon.
Rick, Mr.
And-
Kreis has a question over
Now we're
there.
still in the hole, so we have to go even higher than 5.9. Yes.
I just have one question, probably to Sean. Are these pre-consolidation numbers?
These are pre-consolidation numbers.
Yeah.
So we also,
Yeah, that's good to
down
know.
at the bottom, have there 27 through 31, we extended it out, just to show you, we're not just looking at year 5, but beyond.
Yeah, Sean gave me his estimates going out beyond that. That's the row number 78, and then we're just carrying this exercise forward. So let's go to 6.9, Pam, and just, I want to get that number in salmon. I want to get that in the black. I just want to see how far, all right, now we're in the black. So somewhere between 5.9 and 6.9, if we wait an extra year, if we put a levy on in 2024, we're going to be in the black. See the new bottom line there, K74. Yes, Pam's highlighting it. Now we're in the black. So that, what you guys can do, at your leisure, is to kind of play around with this and plug in certain millage scenarios and say, all right, what about 3.9 if we wait a year? What about 6.9 if we do it early? How far out can we go and be in the black? Because the answer to the question, what's the right number, is going to depend upon your goal. If your goal is just to be in the black at the end of the 5-year forecast, this exercise will help you figure out what that number needs to be. If your goal is, I want 60 days cash, at the end of the day, in year 5 of the 5-year forecast, that's a different question, and so your number might have to be a little bit higher. I'm sorry, I think you had a question.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
Is there any way right now, leading into what we have to do in the next meeting, to change K64 to reflect post-consolidation?
I could.
A post-consolidation number, so we could see what would happen post-consolidation, because we've gotten that question a lot. Can you, residents, constituents, can you promise us that you can consolidate a new bond and still not need an operating, like they want to know that. I want to know that as a board member too. So I would love to see K64 reflective of post-consolidation, our best educated guess on what post-consolidation would look like, capturing that savings as the plan is proposed for us to vote on tonight, and to see the blue and the salmon numbers, how they kind of move.
I think we sort of have that, right, Sean? I mean, it's, we're at a 3.15 now, $1 million savings in terms of what our projections are for the consolidation. We're at negative 24 million, so even if you take 10
You
off
take
of that.
6.2 off that,
Yeah.
it's 2 years, you're looking
I
at.
thought you said we could take 3 years off of it, Sean.
We're in 22 and 23. So, yeah, 3 years, so
Yeah, so it's.
You're taking off
24 minus 9.3 is still.
you're still $15 million.
But so if we had that though, and that was my question, could you do 3.9 and consolidation and get here? So we're not asking for an additional 3 mils,
Well-
because
Oh,
that
add
3
the
mils is
3.9
essentially, here's the bottom line, that 3 mils Well, 1 mil more is essentially the bond issue.
Pam, can you put 3.9 back in that slot?
So that's kind of my question, like, is there a happy medium?
So if you look at 3.9,
It is, but
if she looks at
if we're
3.9
asking
with the new
them
bottom line as minus 9.5, if we
for
take off
the bond
9
plus the
million,
operating,
9.1 million, I think
the
we said,
consolidation
you're
can equal
almost breaking even?
for those years.
And that's if you wait until 2024 to put it on the ballot.
Right.
Because that's what the salmon represents, is a delay of a year. So, yeah, with the consolidation, you're essentially a wash at the end of the 5-year forecast. If you're going
Put
to
it on
assume.
23, you're saying.
Yeah, so, again, if that's the goal. If the goal is to get to the end of the 5-year forecast in the black, plus consolidation, and, you're roughly there.
So in the information to the board, when we get to the meeting here in an hour, can you have this reflective of post-consolidation?
I could,
Thank you.
I already have a spreadsheet.
I figured you could easily copy and paste the numbers to the right I just didn't want to mess up the formula if we all start
Right.
dancing in there right now, so.
Okay.
Okay, I hate to
I know.
move us along, but we've got an executive session to consider a
Okay.
collective bargaining agreement.
Thank you for
Mr.
all of
Manoff.
your.
I appreciate it.
Thank you all
Thank you.
again.
Thank you, Ray.
All right.
Insightful as always.
Pam, do we need to end this and then go to executive session? or-
We have to
No,
vote to go
no.
into executive
Vote to it.
session.
Just vote.
So, all right, so I move to adopt Resolution 2022-06-197 to adjourn to the executive session
Second.
relative to negotiations.
Well, second.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2022-06-197. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, roll call, Mr. Nucio.
Mr. Vaughn,
Yes.
Mr. Ruda,
Yes.
Mrs. Carpus.
Yes.
Mrs. Bratz.
Yes.
Mr. Kreis.
Yes.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Parma City School District hereby adjourns to executive session at
5:10.
5:10 PM relative to negotiations. Note, the Ohio law provides that school boards may meet in executive session to discuss legal issues, property issues, and personnel issues. Because of the confidential nature of these issues, this part of the meeting is closed to the general public, and the matters to be discussed are not specifically listed on the agenda. No resolution will be voted on during the executive session. All voting must take place in open
Okay,
session.
thanks.
Thank you.